Hello, so different camera view today. I thought I'd dedicate today's lesson on how to get more of a jazz sound out of a Telecaster. Now, this is something I get asked a lot, both in the comment sections of videos, but also on gigs as well. I think people have this idea that there's a certain type of guitar that you have to play for jazz, and it's got F-holes in it, and all the rest of it. And this is not true. There's plenty of jazz guitarists who play Telecasters or have played Telecasters. One big example is Ed Bickett, who died recently, the amazing jazz guitarist, played with Paul Desmond and others. He played a Telecaster. There's the example of Jakob Bro, a contemporary player who plays a Telecaster. Bill Frisell, Adam Rogers have played Telecasters at some point. In solid body like Fender guitars in general, like Joe Pass spent a portion of his career playing, I think it was either a Jazzmaster or a Jaguar, can't remember which. He just had an endorsement deal, that's what he was playing at the time. He still sounded like Joe Pass, mind. Joe wasn't really fussy about gear anyway. There's many modern players play a Telecaster. I'm not going to list them all, you can probably think of your own examples. Both players who play with quite a traditional jazz tone and those who like to push the envelope a bit. And the great thing about playing a Telecaster is it allows you to do both. I would say like the biggest link in the chain, any guitar can be a jazz guitar, right? So this is a misconception. There are tones that you can only get out of, say, a Gibson L5 or a Gibson 175 or a, maybe some handcrafted modern luthier-built guitar. And that's all true. But I think there's also sounds that you're going to get out of a hollow body guitar, like. There's something about the smoothness of the way you can play chords on a solid body, which is unique to that instrument. I can't play that connected on an archtop guitar, or at least none of the ones that I own. So that's a quality which I think is very suitable for jazz on this particular guitar. Okay, I'll talk a little bit like amps. You can have really any guitar, and if you set it up to the neck pickup, then this will work, right? Even something like a Pointy Ibanez or something. So your amplifier should have some clean headroom. Fenders are very common with jazz players if they're using a tube amp. So Fender Deluxe is probably the most popular one, I would say. But hot rods, anything will work. Solid state amps are also popular with jazz guitarists. But, you can get a good clean sound out of a Marshall if you set it right, there's no amp that I can think of. I know jazz guitarists who play Mesa Boogie amps, there's no amps that I can think of that have, which can't be tweaked to have a good jazz tone. It's just that people like Fenders because they have lots of clean headroom. But then so do Boogies, So, really, just get your sound on something very clean, and the jazz tone is a lot cleaner. Excuse me, I'll scratch my arm. The jazz tone is a lot cleaner, I think, than what rock guitarists would think of as a clean tone. You want it quite sparkling. So this guitar has gauge 11 NYXLs, D'Addario strings, or D'Addario as Americans insist on calling them. These are, I would think of as standard kind of blues rock gauge strings, nothing fancy. These tone controls, sorry about the crackle. These tone controls, crackle, are at maximum, both volume and tone at maximum, and obviously the pickup selector is on the neck pickup. So most, I'm talk about plectrums in a second, picks, but I think at the moment most rock guitarists, and certainly me when I was getting started, put your hand in a position like this because it's practical, because it allows you to mute the strings, and when you're playing loud you really want to be cautious about that, because obviously you get a lot of ring from strings if you're not playing perfectly cleanly, but then the strings will also burst into the sound themselves due to feedback from the amp and so on. So controlling the sound like this is quite important. It also allows you to get muted effects and so on. So I'm just going to play in this position. We've got a sound like that, right? what I think of as quite a sort of mellow, clean lead sound, you know. And it's not quite jazzy. I mean, obviously I'm not playing jazzy stuff, but if I was to play some jazzy stuff on it, then it might sound like this. That's fine. It's a little bright, I would say, okay? So, I mean, you know, perhaps if I'm playing like a loud fusion gig or something, I might want my hand to be in this position. But one way you can make the sound a bit more jazz right away is to move the hand towards the neck pickup, like so. And then if I play over there, you know, again using this traditional sort of grip. Okay. And the closer you go to the bridge, the more kind of upper harmonics you're going to get. The closer you go to the neck, and you know, for strumming, sometimes I play right over here, right over the neck. Just to get that real sort of warm sound. It's like, you know, the more you go this way, the darker the sound becomes. So it's a natural tone control. You don't need to adjust these things to be able to shape your tone. And in this sense, I think jazz guitar is almost like a mix between electric playing and acoustic playing, because in acoustic playing, obviously, this is all you've got. You know, how hard you hit the strings, where you hit the strings, that all shapes your tone. Electric guitar, obviously, we have all these tone shaping possibilities. Even without pedals, I've got the controls on my guitar and the controls on the amp. And if you add pedals into the equation, then obviously the possibilities become vastly expanded. And rock players, for instance, will spend a lot of their time playing distorted, and distortion itself is a whole bunch of variables to get that right, you know, and to get the sound you want can require a lot of savvy and knowledge about equipment and how to use it. So I would say jazz is kind of in between those two extremes. If you like, there's rock guitar there and acoustic up here, then jazz is here, right? So because of that, I think I'm using a slightly heavier sound, like heavier attack than I might use for rock, even though that's kind of counterintuitive, just because, you know, rock you can, if you've got like a bit of muting going on, you don't have to pick very hard, you know. You know, and you might use that sort of lightness of pick attack to match up the sound of your picking and your legato, your left hand legato, for instance, if you're that kind of a player. So lighter picking works, and then, you know, you can always like just whack a string when you want to give it a bit more welly. And if you're a blues player, for instance, you know, the dynamics of how you pick will affect the way the amp responds. In jazz, we're not really interested in that so much, so we tend to play it quite uniformly a lot of the time. It's almost like you've run the guitar through a compressor to some extent, you know. So we want accents to be something that we choose to use, but on the whole, we want that kind of even sort of, you know. Okay, you can hear the strings ringing there because I'm using a floating hand position. So. So I've used my left hand there. You can't see it, but I use my left hand to clean that up a bit when I was playing. So you do have to be, if you're playing with a floating hand, you have to be a little bit more careful about what kind of muting you're using, and indeed the accuracy of your playing. You can, of course, just anchor your hand there, which you do see players doing. I see Peter Bernstein doing that, for instance. That might, from a mechanical point of view, that might put your picking in a slightly different place, so you might become more of an upward pick slanter, as Troy Grady calls it. But you can hear that kind of affects the sound, makes it brighter. So compared to this, it's a marked difference, I think. But, you know, you can probably work something out, you know, where you can just like rest your hand on the strings and move that up and down as it goes. Okay, so another variable which is also quite important is pick angle. I've been trying to play, you know, my examples with a more or less pick angle that's parallel to the string. So the pick plane, the plane of the pick, you look at it that way, is actually going going straight onto the string. So now if I incline it, and you can do that simply by moving your elbow like that, just up a bit above, so your hand is draping down a little bit more. I can clean all that twanginess off it. Okay, that gives you a more mellow sound right away. Now the extreme version of that is to come underneath like this and to hold the pick like this, and this is sometimes known as Benson picking, although I think Benson picking is actually a pretty specific thing and I wouldn't necessarily want to call this Benson picking. There's quite a few jazz guitarists who play like this though. Adam Rogers, for instance, Cheryl Bailey, George Benson, of course, and in the gypsy jazz world, Stefan Genio plays like this as well, this kind of a technique. And what it does is it effectively rolls off a lot of that kind of pick attack. Gives you a lot more kind of almost a legato character to the sound, I think, and it also has the effect of making your pick seem like it's kind of heavier than it is. So, for instance, I'm playing here with a 1.5mm pick, which is quite heavy for a lot of people, but in the gypsy jazz world, that's quite a light pick, for instance. But I still use this pick, and I, with lots of angle on it. So I'm playing like for gypsy jazz, I'm playing back here with that kind of angle on it. It sounds like a heavier pick than it actually is. That's quite useful. I've moved from using like 3mm Vegan picks to using much lighter picks and getting pretty much the same sound. So that's something I've explored a lot. So another thing that can help you get that sort of so one way you can sort of work on getting your tone is just to play downstrokes all the time, and getting a good quality downstroke is actually, I think, a good way of getting into producing a good jazz sound. I mean, historically, some players such as Charlie Christian have used mostly, if not all, downstrokes. So one contemporary player uses mostly downstrokes for slower playing, as Mike Marino, for instance. And it certainly gives you a nice warm sound. I think it's great. Of course, you can also use your thumb, which is essentially the same thing. Upstrokes are impossible with the thumb, as Wes Montgomery showed, but they're not very common. So by learning that style of picking, you can sort of at least get a good way into a good jazz tone. When you use upstrokes, you can then integrate those and match them up with the sound of your downstrokes for a consistent sound. And I think in jazz, particularly electric jazz, not as opposed to gypsy jazz, we're looking for a nice uniform sound, like a saxophone, rather than lots of different accents and tone qualities in the line. So I think that's very much the aesthetic of the style, and I think that like I've said it before, but I'll say it again because I think that's one of the biggest differences. So you're looking for uniformity when you play. You're looking for being able to go. So that the upstroke and the downstroke sound basically the same. There's not too much difference in volume. Okay, so I think I'll finish that off with, the rest stroke is really important. So I find like for the downstroke practice, if I play a rest stroke into the next string like that, it doesn't have to be loud. You don't want that really, but a light rest stroke can really help you sort of navigate around the guitar and also give you that kind of definite but warm sound on the guitar. I find it really useful for that. Troy Grady has a lot to say about rest strokes. It's basic, what you might call downward pick starting, like upward escape style picking, which is used by many jazzers from, Django Reinhardt to Mike Stern, who's another Telecaster player, by the way, forgot to mention him, based around this idea of the downward rest stroke and the slant of the pick and all that, but I won't really get into that. This stuff will work whether you're an alternate picker or not. you know, or you pick some other way if you play economy style, you know, even if you play economy style, you're still going to get a jazzy sound, you know, if you play near the neck and use lots of, you know, I mean, that sounds pretty jazz to me, with all those sweeps. So it's like, you know, just that sort of angle of the pick and just where you are on the you know, on the guitar will help you a lot. My basic philosophy then with all of this is to try and start off with a good sound on the instrument and then adjust everything else to the room. So I mean that can even be like picks. So if I give you like several picks, I've got 4 here, all quite different. So first one I'm going to show you is this horrible thing. This is a Jim Dunlop big stubby nylon. I like these for years, although they're less. I like them less now for various reasons. I think they're just a bit big. Don't need that big of a pick now. I used to play 3mm vegan picks like Gypsy Jazzers use on some guitars, and I rarely use those picks now. I don't really, you know. So I've moved from going from really thick picks, what most people think of as being mad, to much thinner ones. I average about 1.5mm now. Here's a Jazz 3, which is a popular pick with rock players, jazz shredders, but it's also popular with jazzers too, I think. This one is probably let's back the other way. This one's probably one of my main picks at the moment. This is, I don't know exactly what it's called. Is it a prime tone? What does it say? I can't read. Never mind. Anyway, it's looks like this. It's a bit of plastic. It's plastic pick, but it's got a sort of rough texture to it. It's quite nice to play with. And then, of course, here's standard kind of pick most people will be familiar with. Faux tortoise shell, quite thin. I think this one might be 1mm maybe, you know. And I'm just going to demonstrate it's possible to get a jazz tone out of all of these. I'm going to play my nylon big stubby first. It's nice, okay. This is the Jazz 3. Sounds like this. Nice jazz tone, right? Who'd have thought it? Okay, and then the next one I'm going to show you is this little plastic one that I've got, the Jim Dunlop one that I couldn't remember the name of. It's Prime Tone or one of those. I can't remember exactly what. Sounds like this. I prefer it in this position. A little bit clickier, a little bit more treble than the other one. I find often actually I quite like to have a bit of treble in the guitar sound, even. And then the thinnest pick, this little faux tortoiseshell one. A lot more kind of treble to it, a lot more snap. This is the kind of pick I believe George Benson uses. So there you go. Hope you find that helpful, and leave any questions you might have below. Thank you very much.